Indian economy, which continues to throw up some very good surprises. It posted an impressive 7.8% growth in GDP for the last quarter of the last financial year, and that has pushed up the entire financial year's growth, GDP growth, to a whopping 8.2%. Official data has revealed a slight dip from the 8.6% expansion in the previous quarter of the last financial year, but has shown significant progress from the 6.2% growth in the same period in the last financial year. Data coming in from the National Statistical Office at NSO for the full financial year 2023-24. India's GDP soared by 8.2%, outpacing by a mile the 7% growth it put up in the year 2022-23. The NSO, bear in mind, had anticipated a 7.7% growth for financial year 24 in its second advance estimate, making this outcome all the more noteworthy. For Q4, or the fourth quarter of financial year 2024, GDP growth data was released, and various polls had expected that the Indian economy's growth would have slowed to an annual 6.7% in the last quarter. The Indian economy had unexpectedly grown at 8.4% in the third quarter of FY24. Economists were of the view that this GDP growth rate was unlikely to continue into the fourth quarter as well. Meanwhile, the Reserve Bank of India, in its annual report, had stated that the Indian economy is expected to grow at 7% in the current financial year, that is financial year 2024-25. Bear in mind, India is the world's fastest growing major economy and currently holds the tag of being the world's fifth largest economy. And in the coming years, it's expected to become the world's third largest economy after only the US and China. In contrast, China, our major economic rival, recorded just a 5.3% growth in the first quarter of 2024. We have my colleague Karthik Malhotra now joining us for more. Karthik, we were celebrating with an RBI annual report which said that for the third consecutive year, India's economy, India's GDP is growing at 7% or above. Looks like the celebrations need to be bigger. What a surprise this has been.
Absolutely, Krishna, and I think the numbers could not have come actually at a more opportune time for the ruling BJP-led NDA government, because we still have one phase of elections to go tomorrow, and any good report card coming is always good for the voters. So I think overall, when you're looking at the numbers, anything in excess of 8% is not something that we had expected. In fact, even the revised estimates that had come during the year suggested that we will maybe just about barely touch 8% or so. But for the full year, growth coming in at 8.2% is obviously, not something which was expected and something which is much better than what people had hoped for. Now, the only point is that we know that the Ministry of Statistics and Plan Implementation keeps tweaking these numbers, and the revised estimates keep coming. So, at least for now, yes, there is reason to celebrate that we have grown the whole year at 8.2%, but this could very well change as we move along. If you remember, for the previous quarter as well, the Q3 of FY24, the initial numbers reported were about 8.4%, but that increased to 8.6%, which again has been instrumental in shifting the overall burden of GDP growth to the higher side. So overall, we don't know whether these numbers eventually are going to change for the better or the worse. So revised estimates should not be ruled out. But I think you mentioned China, and it's a good note to sort of bring into this conversation that when one of the bigger economies and a bigger nation which is really big on manufacturing is growing at just over 5%, then India growing at a good 3 percentage points higher than that is obviously, good news for India as a whole and for trade in India. Now, for our viewers, I just want to break it up. How is GDP really calculated? And I think we'll really see the larger India story in that. So the simplest formula of GDP is that GDP is equal to C plus G plus I plus X minus M, which is, the total consumption which happens in the country, the total spending that the government does, all the infrastructure that the government builds, which is also called investment. So government as well as private infrastructure that gets deployed, which is long-term in nature, is I, and then the net imports or the net exports, as the case may be. On consumption, you have the auto sales data for the whole year. India has sold and bought rather 40 lakh cars. So the consumption story is definitely looking good. Even though the FMCG side, especially on the rural India front, has not really kicked up the way it should have. But overall consumption is looking good. Government spending, we know all the schemes that the government has implemented, launched, all the taxpayers' money which has been spent on, on developing, the rural part of the population is something which goes into the GDP formula. And then investments, the roads, the highways, the ports, the airports, all the government heavy lifting which is done on infrastructure development goes into the investment component. And of course, India has been lucky and smart that the oil import bill, which could have been much higher, has actually turned out to be lower than expected because of the cheap Russian oil that India has imported. So overall, all components are in the green for India, and that is reflecting in the numbers.
Lucky and smart as far as our economy is concerned. Karthik Malhotra there joining us with the latest on the GDP numbers. An extremely happy surprise, over 8% GDP growth